Okay. Good evening, everybody. I think we'll wait for a few more delegates to join. We're at 143, but we had 500 and some odd that responded. So we'll give it 1 or 2 minutes. Is that okay? Hi, everybody. We're just waiting for a few attendees to join. We're sitting at 185. 500 have responded, so we're just giving people another minute and we'll start. I hope that's in order. Okay. Good evening, everybody. I am Rajeshri Mudli. On behalf of the Discipline of Dentistry, University of KwaZulu-Natal, and the IADR South African Division, I would like to welcome each of you to our first webinar. A special welcome to our international attendees. Some house rules before we start. All participants are muted. Please submit all your questions and comments via the Q&A platform. Please do not use the chat. At the end of the webinar, a link through an email will be sent to you where you are required to put your name in and your HPCSA number for admin purposes and CPD purposes. I now hand you over to the president of the IADR South African division, Professor Sadika Khan, who will now address you. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and a warm welcome to each one of you to this IADR South Africa's first webinar. I'm just going to share my screen with you. I'm going to speak very briefly. I was given 5 minutes to speak only. Can you see my screen? Because I can't see it.
Yes, Prof, we can, clearly. But first, okay. No, you've got to put it on show.
Stop sharing first. I saw it earlier on, so I don't know what happened now.
It will.
It will. Okay. Share. Can I keep it that way? You want the full screen?
Oh, that's fine.
Is that fine? Okay. So welcome, a warm welcome to each one of you to this IADR South Africa's first webinar. We hope to have a series of these over the next few years. A warm welcome to both IADR and non-IADR members and potential IADR members. A warm welcome to all researchers, seasoned, emerging, and potential researchers. A warm welcome to past IADR presidents. Your presence is acknowledged and it's appreciated. To those of you who aren't familiar with IADR, just a brief introduction. The name, International Association of Dental Research, is a global organization, and its mission is to drive dental, oral, and craniofacial research for health and the well-being. The vision of IADR is oral health for all through discovery and dissemination. IADR consists of country-specific divisions, of which there are about 45, of which South Africa, the South African division, is one such division. IADR also consists of regional groups, of which there are 5, and the Africa Middle Eastern region, which is called the AMIR group, is such a group, and the South African division belongs to the AMIR group. IADR also consists of several working groups. They consist of the evidence-based healthcare group, they consist of dental materials group, they consist of the global oral health inequities group. So if you look at the IADR web page, it is extremely full of good resources and a good guide to find whatever else IADR offers. IADR also has several platforms, and the aim of the different platforms and working groups is for IADR members to engage with each other globally, to share insights, to share research, to collaborate, to post resources, and to share hot topics with each other. Other platforms that IADR has are the conferences, which are locally, and of course per division. So every division will have their own conference, as well as globally. They also have a discussion forum. So if you're an IADR member, you will be sent to these discussion forum on a regular basis, in fact, daily. IADR also have now engaged with a lot of webinars from the different working groups. So as an IADR member, you will then have access to all of these. So I encourage you to join IADR and to join IADR South Africa so that you are exposed to all of these. IADR also encourages participation, not just from all the dental schools and dental universities, but also other NGOs and NPOs, as well as government agencies. And that is with all groups that share the same agenda as IADR. IADR has 3 journals: the Journal of Dental Research, the Journal of Clinical and Translational Research, and Advances in Dental Research. So again, I encourage you to join IADR. IADR South Africa, and I'm afraid my colleague on the far right is Dr. Ruan Skeepers, constitutes largely of colleagues from the 4 dental schools plus UKZN. Our intention is to further the IDR agenda. The purpose of this webinar is to increase our membership, to educate colleagues about IDR, to encourage collaboration, to encourage research, to encourage exposure of the different colleagues and members on the different platforms, and to support research. And if you are not into research, we are here to encourage you to do research. Currently, the EXCO consists of members from the different dental institutions. And as you can see here in front of you, IDR South Africa also has and hosts conferences annually and locally, and it rotates amongst the different universities. We've over the years have had conferences face-to-face, and I must say I'm missing that. It was the most exciting part of our year. Since 2020, of course, we've been going virtual. Since 2005, we've had conferences rotating amongst the Amir group, and it rotates every 3 years. So in 2022, the Amir Group conference will be hosted by Saudi Arabia. Coming back to the local conference, IDR SA, this is a platform for colleagues and students under and postgrad to share their research with each other, whether it's in the form of posters or oral presentations. We also have competitions at these conferences, and it's for undergrad and postgrad. And these students are then have automatic entry into the Hatton competition, which is hosted by the Global Session in America or wherever else they have it every other year. IDR also administers a research fellowship where you can apply for funding for your research for that year. So I do encourage you to become members of IDR, where you will have access to all of these. IDR 2020 and 2021 and 20, we've now opened up our own Instagram page, and I encourage you to visit this page, where we're hoping to share research that people have presented at IDR to showcase what we've done over the years and to encourage people to join IDR. So if you want to, please join and follow us on Instagram. Today is the first webinar, and we wish our presenter all the best with the presentation. I can assure you it will not be a disappointment. Our next webinar, which will be in a few months' time, will be on grant writing, and I hope all of you will join us then as well. The presentation of today will be found on the YouTube repository after today. So I wish you all the best, and I wish you, this is going to be a space of learning and new information that you can share with colleagues, especially those that are not present. Thank you for your attention. Carry on.
Thank you, Prof. Khan. Thank you. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to our speaker today. She's also my colleague. Prof. Shenuka Singh first graduated as an oral hygienist and worked for the KZN Department of Health. She joined UKZN as a full-time staff member in November 2009 and started postgrad research supervision in 2011. Within a 10-year period, Prof. Singh successfully supervised 8 doctoral and 6 master's graduates and has over 50 publications. She assumed various leadership positions within UKZN and at national level, notably in the research ethics arena. The World Health Organization recently invited her to be part of a working group to develop a WHO tool for benchmarking research ethics oversight. Isn't this amazing? I now hand you over to Prof. Shenuka Singh. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mudli. Good evening, and thank you for your interest in this presentation. It is so good and nostalgic to see so many familiar names in the attendance register. A warm welcome to all of you. I will now share my presentation. So research involving humans is punctuated by the need to show respect, upholding rights and dignity. Likewise, there is need to consider the welfare, rights, and legal requirements for using animals in research. This presentation focuses more on ethics involving human participants, but I will speak briefly about animals in research. At the same time, it is important to consider the impact of research on the environment and how we take into account ethical issues related to biosafety. This is an overview of research ethics. It is not possible to cover all aspects within the time frame. So this presentation is intended to create awareness of research ethics, specifically in relation to dental, and here I'm talking about oral and craniofacial research, and the need to ensure compliance with ethical legal requirements in research. However, the principles of ethics are applicable to research in general. For this purpose, I will take you on a journey through the research ethics landscape, and we will develop a toolkit that can act as a resource to support and encourage ethical practice in research. So this toolkit is not intended to act or to be a one-size-fits-all. The nuances between the different types of research, from whom the data is collected, and the ethical concerns that arise at different points of the research process must be taken into account. So building such a resource is also a very dynamic process. Neither is the information highlighted in this presentation an exhaustive list of all available resources for researchers. So looking at the attendance list, I am aware that we have a very diverse audience, and delegates may be at different levels of research-related development. I have therefore structured the presentation accordingly to accommodate both the novice and advanced researcher, as well as delegates who have not yet entered the research arena, but are thinking about postgraduate education. So we will first start by defining what is ethics and how this applies to research. So while morality is concerned with the conduct of behavior, ethics is related to the standards for acceptable practice. Thus, you could have professional ethics, sports ethics, business ethics, etc. Ethics is concerned with the standards set by researchers for what is acceptable practice, but it also includes measures put in place to redress violations and deviations from the ethical code of conduct. However, we should note that all of this is underpinned by values and beliefs as well as sociocultural practices. So what does ethics have to do with research? Is ethics simply about taking the high road? That is, we fill in an ethics application for ethical clearance once our research protocol is ready, and then we put in the correct words such as dignity, respect, rights, etc. in the application form. Research ethics should be about engaging with the realities at the grassroots level, the challenges, the foreseeable risks, and the measures that are put in place to mitigate these risks. So what if you had conducted research without obtaining proper ethical clearance? Does it make it acceptable because you did not get caught out? I have heard so many times of researchers saying, but my study has no risks. I am only administering a questionnaire or conducting an interview. So why research ethics? We need to build public support for research. This is particularly important given that ethics violations did occur in the past. Some examples include the experiments that were conducted by the Nazi doctors on people held in concentration camps during World War II. Another example is the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, where Black American men were denied access to treatment for syphilis because the researchers wanted to track the natural progression of the disease, and this happened for almost 40 years. However, let's look at the current situation. Public support for research has become even more critical in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, specifically with regards to the current inequities in global access and distribution of vaccines, the rise in mutant strains, and ongoing questions on durable vaccine immunity. So now we will look at some principles related to ethics, and these are the core principles that can be applied in any situation. So firstly, we start with beneficence. Now, beneficence refers to study benefits. What are the direct or indirect benefits that a study participant can accrue? The next principle is non-maleficence. Now, non-maleficence means do no harm. But as long as you have a research participant who's human or you have an animal, some degree of risk is going to exist. This means then research should not be conducted. So therefore, there is a need for what we would call a benefit risk assessment, where the benefits of a particular study must always at all times outweigh any foreseeable risks. We then have autonomy. Now, autonomy refers to independent decision-making. So we have used a Eurocentric approach to understand autonomous decision-making. But from an African philosophical perspective, decision-making could be influenced by family members, community members, traditional leaders, traditional healers, and probably even ancestral spirits. It is more important in the case when a research participant is expected to provide biospecimens for research purposes, and when these are stored for unknown future use. Another ethical principle is justice, and here we refer to distributive justice. So how is there fairness and equity when we select our study participants? How do we ensure that the burdens of research is not only carried by the research participants, yet the good or the benefits of research is shared by society? How do we also ensure that we do not exclude study participants by virtue of their vulnerability? For example, pregnant women in clinical trials. So we need to then apply all of these principles very carefully. So now I'm going to go through some ethical considerations, and I'm going to look at both researchers as well as research participants. So I have mentioned benefits. I've spoken about non-maleficence, justice, autonomy. We need to also consider the dignity of study participants, as well as privacy. Now, privacy refers to the participants' space, as well as the data collected. For example, you could be conducting an epidemiological study where you are collecting data on dental caries rates. How do you then ensure that the oral examinations that are being conducted is being done so in a space that maximizes the participants' privacy? Can there be any unauthorized person entering the space when the examination is being done? How do you then secure the data that has been collected? Is this left lying around on your table where anyone can access that information? Another consideration is confidentiality. Now, confidentiality refers to the disclosure of information. Now, remember that the purpose of research is to disclose. However, when we are disclosing this information, we need to make sure that we do not in any way compromise the privacy of the individual concerned. So therefore, as part of the confidentiality process, we will need to anonymize the data. That is, it becomes data anonymity. And by doing so, we can use, for example, codes, or we can use pseudonyms, etc., that will then help to increase the or prevent risks in terms of disclosure of the information. Now, you should also note that there are limits to confidentiality. such limits could be. For example, you are conducting a study involving, say, for example, you are looking at an oral health promotion program, and you have a child, so you're interviewing the child because you want to find out what is the child's understanding and engagement with the program. But the child inadvertently discloses to you that she is being sexually molested. So as a researcher, you now have a legal obligation to report this to the authorities. So that's what I mean by limits to confidentiality. On the other hand, you are now conducting an examination, an oral examination of children in a school, and you notice that the child has an eye infection. Now we are referring to what's called ancillary care. You should be able to identify pathways where the child can then be able to access care. So it's not just only focusing on your research area, but trying to address, at least by providing pathways for referrals when the need occurs. From a researcher perspective, you need to consider the competence of the researcher, and part of this competence also includes having regular research ethics training. I'm going to discuss that a little bit later. There should be integrity from a researcher's perspective, honesty, as well as responsibility. So as a researcher, therefore, you should then think about the following. What is the social value of the particular research that you want to engage in? Now, again, you would have done your literature review, you would have found the gaps in the literature, and you have to make sure that whatever you are proposing is going to add some kind of value. There's going to be some kind of perhaps direct benefits or indirect benefits where you are contributing to the body of knowledge. You should also consider community engagement. Now, this is specifically when you are doing community-based research. You need to consider how are you going to be engaging with communities. The higher the level of risk, the greater the need for community engagement. For example, you want to conduct an experimental intervention study using topical fluoride applications in the experimental arm. So what community engagement efforts are needed to be put in place so that the community can understand the goals of your study? Who are the stakeholders that need to be consulted? Who are the gatekeepers for the community? How do you take into account community beliefs and attitudes towards additive fluoride uptake? If you're a service provider in the same community, how do you separate your role from being a service provider and a researcher? Now, this is very important because the goals of research and the goals of service provision are different, and the ethical considerations also differ. Now, scientific validity, here we're looking at the science. Remember that for the science to be valid, there's got to be credibility, there has to be reliability, and it must also have reproducibility. So you cannot separate the science from the ethics. So hence, you have to have a good, strong scientific justification for carrying out your research that is embedded in good science. I spoke about the favorable benefit-risk ratio. I also spoke about the fair selection of study participants, and now we will look at informed consent. So you would need to consider how is consent obtained and documented. Have you provided adequate information in a language and at a level that the potential participant can understand? I spoke about a communitarian approach to uphold participants' autonomy. How do you ensure that potential participants are given adequate time to think about whether or not to participate in a study? Participants have a right to withdraw from the study. How will this be implemented? If the participant is providing biosamples, and these samples have already been shared with other researchers, how does the right to withdrawal then apply? What are the limits to confidentiality? And all of this is now showing, again, respect for persons. And then we will talk about the independent review. I'm going to pick this up in a couple of slides later. So now let's apply all of this to your enrollment in the Sisonke J&J vaccine trial. Now, for those delegates that are outside of South Africa, this was an open label phase 3 single arm implementation study using a single dose of the adenovirus 26 CoV-2S COVID-19 vaccine. And this was offered to all healthcare workers in the country for those that wanted to accept this. And to date, under 500,000 health workers have been vaccinated. Now, for those of you that have been vaccinated through the study, how many of you were aware that you are a study participant, that you are enrolled in the study for 2 years, that your health records can be accessed by the research team, and that the data can be shared with other researchers in other countries in an anonymized format? You could withdraw at any time without giving any notice and without any negative consequences, but that the study team will still keep the information that has been collected from you. No fault compensation is provided for reasonable medical expenses that is related to study participation. However, it must be related to the study drug. Your legal rights were not waived in any way through participation in the study. Additionally, that you needed to have checked with your insurance company to see if they needed notification of your intention to participate in the program, although the research team pointed out that they didn't really see any challenges to date. You have a responsibility to inform the study team if you have side effects that are greater than those anticipated by the study. And this is referred to as adverse or serious adverse events. You also need to inform the study team if you become pregnant, this is for women now, within 3 months of receiving the vaccination. So I am raising these issues to demonstrate how important it is to read the informed consent document. Now, all that I've said to you is actually listed in the informed consent document. As researchers, therefore, you need to also ensure that potential participants understand what is expected of them and what are their responsibilities. Now note that consent has got both ethical as well as legal dimensions. Consent is not once off, it's ongoing. And where children are enrolled in studies, parental permission is required as well as child assent. Now note, I'm not using the word parental consent. So parental permission means that the parent gives you permission to approach the child, but that the child's assent holds a lot of weight. So the parent can say, yes, the child can participate in the study, but if the child says no, then the rights of the child needs to be upheld. So therefore, it's also very important that you provide adequate information for study participants, that is the potential study participant, because they're not yet a study participant. They only become a study participant once they've actually agreed and signed that document or documented in some way their agreement to be a part of the study. So therefore, you need to provide adequate information, a description of what actually the study entails. What is the data collection process? What is the time of involvement? What could be some of the benefits that could be derived from participating in the study? How is the data going to be gathered? How long will the data be kept? How will the data be disposed of? How is confidentiality and anonymity maintained? That there is a statement that a decision not to participate is not going to result in any kind of disadvantage, that participation is voluntary, and that the person can withdraw at any stage of the study. If there are reimbursements, how and why do you have these reimbursements and financial expenses that could be incurred? In terms of additional consent, now, for example, you want to audio record, or you want to take video recordings, or you want to take photographs. Additional consent is required for all of this, and the potential participant must explicitly consent to have this information or this additional information taken. So I want to take a little bit back now and talk about a research ethics committee. So a research ethics committee is created either at a faculty level or at an organizational level, whose sole mandate is to protect research participants through the review of research protocols. Now, this committee reviews protocols independently of any other review process, and decisions can only be made by appointed members of the REC. The REC can suspend or terminate the study if there are serious safety concerns. So therefore, for those of you that are enrolled in the Sisonke study, you can rest assured that your safety is being monitored by a number of oversight bodies, one of them being a research ethics committee, the other being the South African Products Regulatory Authority, as well as the National Research Ethics Council. So you have different types of research ethics committees that can be created. For example, you have your human research ethics committees that can be divided into health research or human and social sciences. You have your animal research ethics committees as well as biosafety committees. And RECs review research protocols for ethical clearance prospectively. Retrospective approval is not allowed. So let's talk a little bit about animals in research. So when working with animals in research, it is imperative to reduce the impact of pain, thirst, hunger, discomfort, injury, etc. So for this purpose, the 3 R's are applied, which is replacement, that is replacing your higher animals with lower level animals such as amphibians or invertebrates. You could use non-animal models or simulations. Reduction refers to reducing the number of animals in experiments, and also conducting extensive literature searches to avoid duplication of results and ensuring that the appropriate species of animals are used. Refining refers to minimizing the pain or distress that the animal can go through, and this highlights the need for adequate training to conduct the procedure for handling of the animals. So let's look at other ethical concerns specifically related to dental research. So one needs to take into account biosafety concerns with the use of some biomaterials. For example, participants could experience possible allergic reactions if they're subjected to certain materials used in dental research. Also for studies that focus, for example, on the use of different materials for bone grafts in oral rehabilitation, participants need to be informed if the bone grafts have animal bone in it because it could clash with the participants' cultural and religious beliefs. From a laboratory working perspective, one is to also consider the biosafety level of the lab, specifically when one is working with pathogens that have potential infectivity, coronaviruses being one of them. So what is the impact on the environment? As in dental clinical practice, researchers need to take into account the impact of the disposal methods of waste generated during dental clinical or laboratory research. Are these waste included in the general waste that lands up in landfill areas that could be accessed by other animals or foraging or humans for that matter? And these are important issues to consider. I will briefly talk about risk in research. Now, risk is divided as or described as the severity or magnitude of harms that a person can experience, and it can be either physical, psychological, social. Other examples could be informational, political, stigmatization, etc. Now, for levels of risk, it's important to note that the Research Ethics Committee generally will make the determination of the risk. However, as researchers, as research supervisors, you can also then do a risk assessment, and I'm going to cover this a little bit later, by you actually understanding the levels of risk. So no risk basically means no human participation or no human participants. The information is already in the public domain. However, when we talk about research that is conducted on the internet, some restrictions and some considerations need to be taken into account. I'm going to pick this up later on. Minimal risk, this means that the level of risk or harm or potential harm is no greater than what one would experience in an everyday setting. We then have the increase in minimal risk, and now you're looking at the vulnerable populations as well as circumstances that can render anyone vulnerable. So I don't have a lot of time to discuss this, but again, here you're looking at, for example, As I've mentioned earlier, where I spoke about pregnant women, that is not the pregnancy that makes a person vulnerable, but rather what is expected of the woman who is pregnant. So let's talk a little bit about risk assessment. So when you're conducting a risk assessment, you need to now consider what is the nature and extent of the human participant involvement. And note, I'm talking specifically here now about human participation. The types of data that is being collected, the recruitment processes. Does a researcher use any coercive methods to recruit participants? Are there any incentives? Now, incentives are generally frowned upon, especially by reviewers that are part of research ethics committees. However, researchers need to then justify why an incentive is being used, and most importantly, that this incentive must not blind the potential participant to the foreseeable risks associated with the study. Again, we look at conflicts of interest as well. This needs to be declared. Are there any health and safety issues? And if there is any complaints, is there a process in place so that study participants can actually lay complaints against the researcher or even against the institution where the need may arise? So let's talk about now research being conducted during the pandemic, and how do we ensure that we still align with the ethical considerations. As I've indicated earlier on, we need to talk about benefits, whether these are direct or indirect. We've spoken about the risk assessment. Now, if you are conducting telephonic interviews, again, how are you going to be obtaining consent? How are you going to ensure privacy of the participant on the other side of the line? Now, this is very particular depending on the level of risk associated with the study. For example, if a study is looking at what are women's experiences with regards to termination of pregnancy, and you're conducting a telephonic interview. Now, in this particular case, the woman may not have actually disclosed to her family or to her partner that she engaged in termination of pregnancy. So how are you then going to still ensure or put measures in place or inform the participant of ways to ensure or heighten privacy? So in this way, we're ensuring that the participants' rights, privacy, and interests are being upheld. If you're looking at research that has been conducted using the internet, social media platforms are one of the processes that you can look at. Now, here again, you could be using the internet to recruit study participants. You could be mining data. That means the data is already available on the platforms and you're simply trying to extract the data. Or you could actually then be conducting the interview or the online surveys, etc. Now, you need to note, as I've mentioned earlier, while we consider the internet a public space, some of the sites are not public, they're private. So you need to see what are the privacy policies as well as the privacy settings. And some of these sites may require gatekeeping. So you need to know who are the administrators of these sites. Also, you need to think about the consent process. How are you going to be obtaining consent from the potential participants? And how do you then also protect their privacy and interests? If you are conducting interviews or focus group discussions, again, and you are doing this now via face-to-face, how do you ensure, firstly, what plans are put in place? For example, in terms of ventilation, in terms of the availability of hand sanitizers, are you doing any pre-screening for COVID? What processes are in place? Do you have a mask-only policy? So all of this needs to be planned before you actually conduct your interviews or focus groups. If you're looking at clinical trials, here again, try to minimize the number of visits that your participants would be or would need to attend. Are there adequate protections in place? If you are, can you use alternate platforms where necessary so that you can minimize the number of face-to-face visits that are required where possible? If you're working with stored biological materials, again, what is the safety level of your lab? What measures are put in place to protect both staff as well as visitors? Is there access control in terms of a process of how you make these stored samples available to researchers that may require it? If there is a sharing of biosamples, that means you're sharing this with other researchers. Is it a clear process in place? And I'm going to pick this up again. So all of this says now that they, at some level, we should be providing feedback to our study participants. And in this way, we are showing respect. We also need to ensure that the method of how we provide feedback is appropriate. For example, you can't ask your study participants in rural KZN to go and find your published article and read that. So are you able to provide a summary report at a level that your participants can understand? And this has got to be timely as well. So what is this all saying to you? That research ethics forms the foundation of the research process. Right from the conceptualization of the study to the completion, all aspects of research considerations must be taken into account. So let's look at our box now. So we have our toolkit. I've spoken about the scope. We've looked of research ethics. We've looked at the principle. We've applied these principles to the environment or to the research environment. We looked at science and research and science and ethics, as well as looked at skills for risk assessment. Remember, I spoke about the biological materials. Now, if you want to transfer those materials, you need to have what's called material transfer agreements. You also need data transfer agreements to be put in place. You need import-export permits. So we'll throw all of this into our box. Now, let's look at the legal compliance. Section 72 of the National Health Act states that all research or health-related research must be reviewed by a registered research ethics committee. The National Research Ethics Council is a regulatory oversight body for health research through the registration as well as audits of research ethics. At the same time, note that the Protection of Personal Information Act, which came into effect on the 1st of July 2020, researchers need to be aware of the conditions for the lawful processing of personal information, which includes informed consent for initial processing, exercising minimality in collecting personal information, and to ensure safety guards for the storage as well as access to collected information. Now note that the POPIA, which is the Protection of the Personal Information Act, applies only to humans. So here again, you need to point out, or you need to very clearly articulate how is the data going to be stored, where is the data going to be stored, who has access, how is this access controlled, what happens if there are data breaches, how long will the data be stored, what would be the eventual disposal of the data. Simultaneously, a research code of conduct has been developed by the Academy of Sciences of South Africa in consultation with multiple stakeholders. Now note that if you are not from South Africa, you should look at your country-specific legislative frameworks related to research and identify the resources that you could use. So here now you have all your legislative frameworks that you can refer to, and we're going to throw that into our box. This is another list that you can go through. Then we have some guidelines, most notably the South African Department of Health Ethics in Research guidelines. So this guideline is one of the guiding documents that researchers can refer to. You then also have international guidelines, such as the Declaration of Helsinki, the Belmont Report, SIOMS. If you're working with animals in research, you need to look at the SANS guidelines. There is an updated version that's coming up very soon. And we throw that into our box as well. Part of being a good researcher is to then know what research integrity is all about. So here you can look at international guidelines, such as the Singapore Declaration, the Hong Kong Principles. We throw that into our box as well. And like I said, a good researcher is one that is having ongoing engagement with the research process. So you have to then register for online courses, and TREE is a very good course that you could actually engage in. Then there's good clinical practice. And I also wanted to raise your attention to a short course that I actually developed on the ethical, legal, and social implications for biobanking. This is the first for in South Africa and arguably in the African continent. Unfortunately, this course, when it becomes available, is going to have a fee that's attached to it, but this is managed by Stellenbosch University. That's something that you can throw into your resource box as well. So in conclusion, we have thus built a toolkit comprising of information on research ethics, legislative documents, national and international guidelines, code of conduct, and learning opportunities. I understand that this is a lot to absorb and digest in a single session. The presentation will be available on the UKZN YouTube platform, thus you can have other opportunities to revisit the issues highlighted. Now note that having a toolkit is good, but that it is equally important to engage with the resources in the kit to ensure understanding of the ethics landscape, compliance with legal requirements, as well as how you can conduct risk assessments. And collectively, all of this can result in true engagement with research ethics principles that can be applied in context-specific situations. I thank you for listening, and now I will take your queries and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Singh. Dr. Ruan Skeepers is now going to manage the Q&A session. Thank you. Please unmute.
Apologies. Good evening, all. Please, if I can ask you, if you have any questions, please post in the Q&A box so that we can please address that.
All right, so there's a question in the Q&A which says, please provide some information with regards to the course that's been offered at Stellenbosch University. So I'm affiliated with Stellenbosch University as a student. I'm doing my second PhD. So I actually developed a course on the ethical, legal, and social implications of biobanking as part of my PhD. This course, currently we are reviewing, we're doing a final revision and review of the course before it becomes available. This will become available possibly in a month or two. The link will then become active and users would then be enrolled into that particular course. There is also a GCP course that is being offered at Stellenbosch University, so that's something that you can also look into. But note that there are the free courses that are available, which is your tree, as well as GCP. Now, if you are engaging in clinical trials, then you have to submit evidence of having completed your GCP training to the Research Ethics Committee. Also, if you are conducting any type of health-related research, you are expected to complete an ethics training course and you submit that certificate to the Ethics Committee. At the same time, all Research Ethics Committee members are required to constantly engage in ethics as well. So as you can see, even we as researchers, Research Ethics Committee members, academics, etc., have to be constantly engaging with information related to research, whether it's ethics or whether it's training. So we engage in what's referred to as lifelong learning. Thank you.
There is a comment from a private person, and it is, she's interested in starting dental research. So how would she go about pursuing the studies? Would you be able to assist?
That's a fantastic question, and I wish you put your name to it. So Now remember that the first step of research is reading. It's critical reading. And you're actually starting, that's the beginner of a researcher. So you start critical reading. You don't actually need to be in a research setting to conduct research, but it kind of adds that, you know, you have to have some formal background and some formal training in the research process. So as you've seen in this entire presentation, there's a lot that you need to actually consider. There's a lot that you need to take account of. So it is very good that if you want to engage in the research process, that you actually piggy onto someone who's already in the research process. So you become partnered with someone and you then collaborate with someone. But the best way for you to actually engage with research is to start thinking about enrolling for postgraduate education. So in that aspect, you learn the background, the theory of research, as well as having to then gain skills, both at whether it's at a group level or whether these are independent skills. All of this can help to actually then build your research profile. Now note that researchers are not dropped from heaven. It's a process that we follow. There are skills that are developed along the way. You learn things to collaborate, and even I am learning along the way as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Prof, there's also another question where one of the participants asked if there are any ethical considerations for Google surveys.
So if you're conducting a survey using Google as a platform, here again now you need to consider firstly, does Google have any privacy settings in relation to the research? So you need to go back and you need to check. And if there are no privacy settings, then you are able to use the platform to recruit your study participants. However, again, you need to be careful. If you are actually, how are you going to be recruiting your study participants? Are you going to be contacting them via the email addresses? How are you actually going to get hold of your study participants? So POPIA becomes, now that we're talking about the Code of Conduct in Research, POPIA really now makes or adds a huge layer of complexity because it talks about protection of personal information. So where are you going to be accessing this information? How did you get hold of this information? So you need to consider all of these things. So therefore, like I said, with the internet, there are different aspects that you're looking at, both from recruiting as well as conducting the research, as well as even using the data that's already available. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Prof, there's another question where the participant said, I noticed that veracity was not mentioned amongst the pillars of ethics, and how can this be achieved in the world of research?
Thank you very much for that question. So what I basically did was focus on the core ethical principles. Veracity or truthfulness is another dimension that can be added on as well. So truthfulness is very important, and that goes back to researcher integrity. So here we are looking at how does the researcher ensure that he is truthful in terms of what are the findings associated with the study, that if there are negative findings, how do you ensure that this is disclosed, that at all times you are not in any way misleading the public or misleading the scientific community at large. So I deliberately kind of stayed away from research integrity as a section on its own because it's quite big to cover. And I try to focus more on ethical principles, but you are very correct. Veracity is a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Prof, there was a question regarding research. The participant is busy with presently conducting research. She stated, if I have a project with expected low risk, during the experiment, some participants showed severe effects from the treatment. Should I reevaluate the whole project or exclude these participants and go on with the project?
All right, so this is very interesting because this seems to be some kind of clinical study. Maybe there is some kind of an intervention. I'm not getting enough information here, but So you have now submitted your application to a research ethics committee, and you now feel that there is some kind of risk that has been, or some kind of adverse events that you have now recorded. This needs to be reported to the research ethics committee, and your committee will then guide you on what is the process to follow. So I don't want to give you generalized comments or without me knowing the context of the study, because I think there's a lot more specificities that have not been added on here. But suffice to say, please engage with your research ethics committee in this regard. Secondly, if there are any amendments to your study, for example, you want to now exclude certain people, that needs to be discussed with your research ethics committee chair as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Prof, one of our delegates asked the question if there are any specific ethical or research courses required for animal studies. The participant has completed the GCP course, but more than 5 years ago.
Right, so I think one of the requirements when it comes to the AREX, which is the Animal Research Ethics Committees, will again be about recent ethics training, of which GCP generally becomes the one that is most widely used. Unfortunately, I am not aware of any training that's specifically for animal research ethics, but I'm sure there's many that you can actually look upon online. Unfortunately, some of them do have a cost that's involved as well. So it's something that you will need to take into account, but also look what your Animal Research Ethics Committee chairs, as well as so what I'm pointing out over here is that research ethics committees require a level of engagement. As researchers, you can engage with your committee, especially when you don't have enough information, you need further resources, etc. Then you can engage with them. They are in the best position to guide you with what's available as well. So someone wrote a paper which says, you must learn to love your research ethics committee.
Professor Singh, there's a question about the use of extracted teeth in research in South Africa. Is it regulated? I just wanted to add a rider to that. What about students, foreign students who come into your country and they have extracted teeth? If you could just answer the questions related to extracted.
Right, so this is a very interesting question. So extracted teeth or teeth in general do not form part of human biological material. So it is not part of the collection of human biological material. It's actually excluded. Teeth, nails, and hair is excluded. So therefore, there is no clear regulation around that.
Thank you, Prof. Prof, one of our delegates also stated it's an anonymous submission. They are busy with their postgraduate diploma in social behavior and behavioral studies regarding HIV and AIDS. They want some guidance with obtaining ethical clearance if they're planning a groundbreaking research with lack of literature to guide them.
All right, so if the person is enrolled for a postgraduate diploma, then you're already at a university. If you're at a university, there is already an existing research ethics committee that's there in your institution. So you cannot think about ethics when you want to then apply for a grant. You need to think about ethics and ethical clearance right from the conceptualization of your study. So once a study has been conceptualized, your protocol has been approved, and in your particular case, you are a student, so therefore it's going to go through an approval process. Once that process has been completed, it then goes to the ethics committee, your research ethics committee, of which ethical clearance would be granted to you. And when you're applying for your grant, at the same time, you can then submit your ethical clearance letter. Now, remember that with your ethical clearance or with your ethics review process, you can have provisional approval. That means something is outstanding. There are a couple of things that you need to fix before you can get full approval. You can take that provisional approval letter and you can apply for your grant with that. That's acceptable. But you can't start with your study. That's the big difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Prof, there was also a question regarding sponsorships. If the participant wanted to know if there are any departments that they can approach to help them with sponsorship. The delegate find themselves in Freiburg in the Northwest. If you by any chance have any knowledge of any people they can.
All right, so I think I would require a little bit more information here. Sponsorship in which regard? Is it for the research purpose? Is it for funding the study? Is it for a person wanting support in terms of student registration? So I think a lot more is required from that. But suffice to say that there are, if you're attached to a university, there are enough funding calls that come out, and one can respond to those funding calls. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Prof, there were quite a few delegates who thanked you for an insightful and well-presented presentation and for all the knowledge that was shared. There's one question where what recourse do you have as a participant should there not be a full disclosure from the researcher at the time of inception of the participant?
Oh, that's a brilliant question. So here now we have a participant who is upset, disappointed, and angry with the researcher for not having disclosed the true reason for participation. Now, you've got to be a little bit careful over here. There is something called covert research. So where there is deception in research. However, researchers have the responsibility to have what's called a debriefing session. That means once the data has been collected, then you need to tell the participant what was the true nature of the research being conducted. But here we have a case where a research participant is now upset. So there are recourse that can be put into place. One, the researcher can contact the Research Ethics Committee. So that is why when the informed consent document is being developed, you will see that there is a section there for contact details. Contact details for the researcher, the Research Ethics Committee, as well as the supervisor if the researcher is a student. So the research participant can contact the Research Ethics Committee and lay a formal complaint. At the same time, the study participant can also contact the institution, and the institution will then contact the research ethics chair to state, here's a complaint. We would like you to first look into this. If there is any kind of disciplinary action that's required, then you send it back to us. So there's a process and there's channels of communication that can occur. Now the research participant has tried all of these avenues, and the research participant is not satisfied. The research participant is of the opinion that everybody is closing ranks, that nobody's really hearing him. You then have the National Research Ethics Council. So with the council, you can then send a formal complaint. There's a complaints process. There is a website link that you just simply look on, do a quick search for National Research Ethics Council. Once the website comes up, you will see there's a complaints and queries section. You download the application form and you fill in your query. The council will then take your query. It goes to a specific committee. It's interrogated. That query is then taken back to the Research Ethics Committee that was responsible for approving the study. So it goes back and then there's dialogue. So there's now an external body that can also look into the complaints around research. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Prof, there was a question due to the COVID pandemic and the reasons that we can only do data collection online, is it ethically acceptable to request email addresses from the participants from the HPCSA And if not, how can they go about collecting the contact details of the healthcare workers?
That's a brilliant question. Again, it's coming back. Now, remember, I've pointed out that POPIA has come into effect from the 1st of July, 2020. There is a process, a year process of consultation, and that process is completed on the 30th of June, 2021, 1st of July, the entire thing sets out as is. Now, POPIA makes it very clear that one cannot lawfully process information without explicit consent being obtained, and that responsible body for the processing of that information must be authorized to do so. So in this particular case now, to use the email address or the registry at the Health Professions Council without the council members being informed that the reason that this is being shared for research purposes then contravenes POPIA. At the same time, remember that to gain access to such kind of information, you have what's referred to as a gatekeeper. So the HPCSA is now the gatekeeper in this particular case, where the gatekeeper now provides permission to access that kind of information. But like I said, while gatekeeper permissions was a lot easier in the past, now with POPIA being fully implemented, gatekeepers need to also check in terms of having the safeguards and what are the conditions under which this information can be released to third parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruwan and Prof. Singh. Thank you for all the questions. There are several questions that we haven't answered, but we do have your email, and if we can, we'll respond to you directly. So I'll hand over to Ruwan for the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Doc. Dear delegates, it's been a remarkable evening, and we can all vote that research can be a very daunting, and especially for newcomers. As healthcare providers, it is our responsibility to conduct research to improve the level of care that we provide to our patients and to develop innovative treatment regimes. In this, we must aim to never forget about our ethical responsibilities to conduct research in such a way as to never cause any harm or disadvantage to any party in the process of research. I'd like to thank Professor Singh for her impressive insight in ethics in dental research. It's been a very reflective evening with great distribution of knowledge. One can appreciate the collaboration that enhances research output. I also want to thank the South African branch of the IADR and Professor Khan for the excellent support in research and the hard work in driving research in the field of oral health sciences. Dr. Moodley, the organizing committee, UKZN, and the Public Relations Department of the College of Health Sciences for the hard work in organizing this webinar. She and her team have been hard at work with the administration, advertising, arrangement for the CPD, and for the hard work in arranging for the webinar to be accessible on YouTube. Thank you to the IADR members and the attendees for making this event a resounding success with your contributions. Thank you for blessing us with your presence. It has been a wonderful start to our webinar series, and we look forward to having you at the upcoming webinars. I pray that you will have a blessed evening. Thank you very much for attending.
Good evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, bye everybody.
Please stay a bit behind so I can get the photo. Dr. Prof. Khan is gone.
We can ask her to join.
Please.
Sarika, come back.
Let me phone her. She's joining.
Okay, thank you.
Should we smile?
I'll tell you just now.
Oh, thank you, everybody. This was really nice. It went really well.
Indeed, and the turnout was very good.
Yeah, we had 270 at one stage.
281, the highest.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Okay, what was that? I missed something.
Pictures.
We had 280.
Yeah, that was not bad. Yeah. Although people registered, there were a lot more that registered that never came. But there were some people who registered twice. I saw some names twice.
Duplications, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
it was
you
duplicated.
can smile now.
Oh, okay.
Keep smiling.
Oh, I'm a terrible photo person. You better be quick. Don't tell me when you're taking it.
I am now, and you're looking good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll send it to Prof. Singh.
Thank you so much. Let
No
me
problem.
just thank
Thank
all
you,
of them.
Mambuso.
Thank you so much, Sanuka. That was
Oh,
wonderful.
was it okay?
That was
No,
excellent,
it was.
Shanika.
I said to Rajeshri, she said no camera, but she left it, so we're not saying anything. We left you on the camera. Ruan, thank you so much.
Yes,
Oh,
Ruan,
I lost
Well
you,
done.
remember, but you did
well
very
done.
well.
And you to
And
Jayashree, well done.
Rajeshri, thank you so much for all the hard work.
Only
And
a
of course, your
pleasure.
team,
This is Jayashree's
your
baby.
entire team, your Zoom team there. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah, they were
I
excellent.
really appreciate it. Thank
UKZN.
you.
So,
You now have the job of teaching the next group because we're going to move it on. Someone else must.
Absolutely.
So, Ruan, you better find people in your faculty to present, please. And then we just tell your dean someone's going to present.
or even you
must
be
learn-
the, or
Right?
even you be the presenter.
No, it's
Yes.
fine. No, I want other people to present. I mean, every faculty has people, and we must give them a chance. And I don't know what's happening at BITS. Like, I mean, now I know you, right? But you can tell me who else is there. If Ahmed was here, he could tell me what's happening at UP, but they're not coming forth with it. And we need to have that. I mean, I could only
Ruan.
go. Hey? Yeah, so Ruan, look for people in your faculty. Just don't
Ruan
ask.
presented last
Yeah.
night. Ruan,
Shanuka,
you
this is-
presented last
just
night.
don't ask Professor
Dr.
Yengopal.
Patel.
You know-
Professor
you know, you
Yengopal
see-
is now
you-
my dean, eh? You can't ask him.
You know,
I
there's still
I was
189 people
So
listening
what
to you.
can Dr. Patel do? What does he do? He's the
Um,
guy who does, he's always on social media. He shares everything he does, isn't it? I've noticed
he's
it.
in endodontics.
Yes, he's in endodontics.
Yes.
But anything like that we can share, it's in terms of research. It's not discipline specific. Ethics is for research, right? So it's in terms of research. Anybody, there must be people that do research in your faculty. So check them out, check who they are, approach them and say you're going to give their names. But before you give it to us, you give it to your dean, you say this person, and then he will just, get them to present. Okay? Please
Yes,
do
ma'am.
that. You're here now, and we need to drive this a little bit more. I mean, we've only got 2 people. I can't take everybody from UWC. I don't want to. They're not here. They can't hear you. They can't hear me. But I don't have to take all of them. It's not, well, the people are still online. But no, I can't take people from one institution only. I mean, IDR belongs to all of us. So,
definitely.
yeah. Prof. Chetty says she can hear me. I know
Yes,
she can hear me.
177
Don't
people can
worry.
hear you.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's not something bad. It is, we want people from all institutions, and we want people to share what they have, what they know, and how we can improve and encourage other people to join. Thank you so much. The people don't want to leave, Shanuka. It must be you. It can't be me.
I think it's me.
Okay, Rajesh, it's you.
Okay, I'm going to end it for everyone then. Are you all okay?
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
I think
Okay,
this was
only
wonderful.
a
It was our
pleasure.
first one. It was our first one, and it was good. Thanks.
Okay, there's 2 hands raised. Someone wants to say something?
Someone wants to say
Okay.
something? Oh, is there something?
I don't know who it is though.
Hey, would the
No, we
recording
left
be
them.
available? Yes. I hope you stopped recording, the last parts. You will edit that, hey?
Okay, I'm ending it.
Yeah.
Bye everyone.
We agree,
Bye-bye.
Prof. Khan. I don't know what that
Bye.
means. I don't know what I said.